Alright, so today's lecture is dealing with the meaning of life. If you haven't yet read the Tolstoy reading or the Nozick reading, I suggest you go back and do that first before watching this lecture. But let's get started. So, Tolstoy is a famous novelist you've probably heard of for War and Peace or Anna Karenina. But toward the end of his life, he wrote this short piece titled A Confession. As you can see, that was in 1882. And in A Confession, Tolstoy is dealing with a number of philosophical worries about the meaning of life. Essentially, he's hit his midlife crisis. And so he no longer gets pleasure from his work. He no longer gets pleasure from his family, taking care of his family, spending time with his family. Basically, every area of life that used to bring him pleasure up until this point no longer brings him pleasure. And so he starts asking himself, what's the point of continuing to live? What's the purpose for my life? What's my meaning at this point if I'm no longer getting pleasure from anything in life? So the first thing we should think about is this question, what is the meaning of life? And it seems like we can break it down into three separate but equally important questions. And the first is the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And this is the question that scientists tend to deal with, right? So what was the beginning of the physical universe? If there was a beginning, was there nothingness and then something popped into existence? Was there always matter in existence? Why is there something here rather than nothing? So notice the scale of the question here is much larger than just a worry about your own existence. And this is a question that, although important, Tolstoy wasn't really worried about. He was worried about something like one of the two following questions. So the other way we can think about this question, what is the meaning of life, is why do people exist? So this is taking a step back from yourself and saying, well, just why are there people in existence, right? So why, instead of just having planets and matter, why are there biological organisms living? Do we have a purpose? Are we just here randomly? Now, for some of us who have religious leanings, we can think our purpose here is to be good, be moral, and secure ourselves a position in heaven where we'll have sort of everlasting joy. Right? So that could be one type of reason for people existing, is to live in this image of God, live in the image of goodness, so on and so forth. But for many people, even for people who are religious, there's still this worry about why we exist. But for those of us who aren't religious, this question becomes much more difficult to answer, right? So without God, I mean, why do we exist in general? And take a minute. I would pause here if I were you to just take a minute and think about what type of answer would actually satisfy you, right? Because I can't imagine just any answer would satisfy you. So take a minute and think. If you were to ask, why do we exist? What type of answer would you accept? Would you be okay with? Okay, hopefully you paused and thought about it a little bit. So the reason I think this question's so interesting is, let's take this example here from the show Rick and Morty. So in Rick and Morty, Rick powers his spaceship by this battery, and the battery gets its power from this little universe inside that Rick created. And so Rick created this entire universe, and in this universe, everybody has to step on this paddle, right? And this is what they do all day, right? And by stepping on this paddle, they generate power, and they're told to do it, right, for the greater good. But it turns out their entire purpose, although they don't know it, is simply to power Rick's spaceship. Right? So imagine you walk up and you ask, okay, what is the meaning of life? Why do people exist in general? And somebody told you, well, your whole existence is just to power a spaceship. Right? Would you be satisfied now? Or would you think that's not enough? That's not a good enough reason for me to continue living. It's just to be somebody's sort of battery power. I also imagine another answer we could give that wouldn't be satisfying, right? Is that we're just here as sort of a farm for higher intelligent beings. And so aliens just use Earth as a farm, and the only reason we exist is because we were created for food. Once again, I don't think you'd be, at least I'm certainly not, and I don't think many people would be, okay, would be accepting of that purpose, right? So it can't just be any answer we give. We have to find not only an answer to why people exist, but one that's also satisfying. And as I'm pointing out, that gets difficult to do in the absence of maybe some type of higher being. Okay, but in addition to this, Tolstoy wanted to bring the focus even more narrow, right? And so he wants to ask the question, why do I, in particular, exist? So he's not worried about why people exist. He wants to know why there's his specific place in the universe. Why is he there instead of somebody else? Is there something that he has been brought here to do that's special, right? That no one else can do? Now, if you can find an answer to that, that would be pretty satisfying, right? So, although maybe humans are just generally here, um, and most of us are here by accident, maybe Tolstoy was placed here to produce these great novels, to influence thinkers later down the road. That would be a pretty satisfying explanation. So, what type of answer, once again, would satisfy you here? What type of story would you need to be told? Uh, Unfortunately for Tolstoy, he can't think of any further reason for his particular existence. And so here we get to the story of the Eastern Traveler. As I'm noticing the typo here at the top. Sorry about that. It's the Eastern Traveler. So I'm going to read from Tolstoy here for a second. Hopefully you don't mind. He's one of the greatest novelists of all time. So here's a quick passage from him. So there's an old Eastern fable about a traveler who is taken unawares on the steppes by a ferocious wild animal. In order to escape the beast, the traveler hides in an empty well, but at the bottom of the well he sees a dragon with its jaws open, ready to devour him. The poor fellow does not dare to climb out because he's afraid of being eaten by the rapacious beast. Neither does he dare drop to the bottom of the well for fear of being eaten by the dragon. So he seizes hold of a branch of a bush that's growing in the crevices of the well and clings onto it. His arms grow weak, and he knows that he will soon after resign himself to the death that awaits him on either side. Yet he still clings on, and while he is holding on to the branch he looks around and sees the two mice, one black and one white, are steadily working their way round the bush he's hanging from, gnawing away at it. Sooner or later they will eat through it and the branch will snap, and he will fall into the jaws of the dragon. The traveler sees this and knows that he will inevitably perish. But while he is still hanging there he sees some drops of honey on the leaves of the bush, stretches out his tongue and licks them. In the same way I am clinging to the tree of life, knowing full well that the dragon of death inevitably awaits me, ready to tear me to pieces, and I cannot understand how I have fallen into this torment. And I try licking the honey that once consoled me, but it no longer gives me pleasure. The white mouse and the black mouse, day and night, are gnawing at the branch from which I'm hanging. I can see the dragon clearly, and the honey no longer tastes sweet. I can see only one thing, the inescapable dragon and the mice, and I cannot tear my eyes away from them. And this is no fable, but the truth that is irrefutable and intelligible to everyone. The delusion of the joys of life that had formerly stifled my fear of the dragon no longer deceived me. No matter how many times I am told, you cannot understand the meaning of life, do not think about it, but live, I cannot do so because I have already done it for too long. Now I cannot help seeing day and night chasing me and leading me to my death. This is all I can see, because it's the only truth. All the rest is a lie. Those two drops of honey, which more than all else had diverted my eyes from the cruel truth, my love for my family and for my writing, which I called art, I no longer found sweet. So here, Tolstoy, hopefully you've put all the metaphors together. The mice are day and night, slowly gnawing away at his will to live. And the honey represents this semi-pleasure that he's been getting in his life. But the honey, or his family and writing, whatever brings you pleasure, no longer brings him any pleasure. And he sees no reason to sit here and wait for day and night to continue passing until he finally meets his natural death. Why not just give in and call it quits where he's currently at? There's no reason to just sit here sort of clinging on to nothingness. Okay, so I mean, I know that's a little grim, but one thing we need to notice here is that Tolstoy's been slowly asking himself this why question. Why? Slowly asking himself over and over this why question, like a child, right? So why should I continue to do this? Why should I continue to live? And then someone will tell him, well, you should continue to do this so you can take care of your family and so you can provide works of art for the community. And he'll say, well, why should I worry about that, right? Why should I care for my family? Oh, because then they can go on to do further things in their life that they enjoy. Sure, but why should I care about that? Why is their continued existence important, right? If I find no pleasure to life, surely there's this lack of meaning, and there's no reason to continue on their life either, or continue his support for that life, unless he can get pleasure from it. So he keeps asking this why question, and he gets to the bottom and he realizes that what he's looking for at ground level is just pleasure, right? So he thinks pleasure has to be there in order to secure purpose. And here we get to his idea of the rational versus non-rational styles of thinking, right? So for rational, Tolstoy is thinking about science and logic, and he thinks the only rational reason to continue living is if you're getting pleasure from life. And that's unless you can find your grand cosmic purpose. The problem is science and logic can never bridge that gap, right? Can never bring us from this finite world to the infinite realm of grand cosmic purpose, to the meaning God has given our lives. So if we're trying to act rationally, we're stuck with pleasure. However, if we take a non-rational route, and for Tolstoy the non-rational meant religious thinking, which he didn't mean in a negative way. There's no negative connotation there. He just meant this non-rational mode of thought, religious belief and faith. Well, if we have that, then we can bridge this gap between the finite and the infinite, right? We can find out from our finite positions what our grand cosmic purpose could be. And so later on in his life, Tolstoy had somewhat of a religious awakening, and many attribute it to this line of thinking in A Confession, where he realized that the only way he could bring meaning into his life was through these non-rational modes of thought. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talk about Nozick. And the point of Nozick is to show that maybe Tolstoy was mistaken. Maybe, even thinking in only rational terms, there's more to life than just pleasure. And we'll continue that in the next video.